as human resources professionals will tell you, it's one thing to wine and dine and recruit talented workers to your area. It's another thing still to keep them happy and want to stay there. Our next guest is no stranger to this concept. Kaushik Nag was born and educated in India, then moved to the US almost 2 decades ago, and has worked for several American companies. For the last 5 years, he's worked for Amway Corporation in talent acquisition and has graciously consented to talk with us today about finding and keeping workplace talent. Kaushik, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Feel Like You Belong.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Very excited to be here.
Great. Now, you grew up in East India, neighboring Bangladesh, and those two regions of the world have something profoundly in common. They also have something profoundly different. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So we actually share the same language because at one point, I would say about 75 years ago, prior to India's independence, it used to be part of the same country, India. But after the independence, Bangladesh, as it stands today, became a part of Pakistan, and it was called East Pakistan at the time.
Even though the two aren't even connected.
Absolutely. And back in 1971, Bangladesh became an independent country. But to answer your question, what happened was because we share the same cultural heritage, same language, same customs, same rituals, everything, therefore we share that bond, and that exist even today. I mean, you know, both people from both these communities, they are so close to each other in multiple ways. Now, difference-wise, the only difference that I can think of is religion, because India, as you know, is predominantly a Hindu country, even though it's secular, and we have so many different religions in India. Bangladesh predominantly is a Muslim country. So that, I would say, is the only difference. But other than that, we are similar in every respect.
Sure. And so, and as we look at history of the world, you know, national borders are temporary because people are always moving and shifting around, and culture and ethnicity, identity is one thing and tends to be very unifying, and occasionally boundaries slip in the way, but you know, we used to have East Germany, West Germany, and now we don't, so.
Absolutely agree with you, 100%.
Yeah. So you got your MBA in human resources. What made you move to the United States? Because there's lots of good work in India.
Absolutely. So I actually worked for almost 10 years in India after I completed my master's, my MBA. But then I was working for an international company that actually had headquarters here in California. So they wanted me to come to the United States and manage their operations from California. And that's where they were headquartered. So that's how I moved here back in '98.
Okay. And were you married at the time?
Yes, I was. I actually had, I already had my first son. My first son was born back in '94. So yeah, when I moved here, he was 4.5 years old.
Okay. So when you said to your wife, hey, we're going to move to the United States, how'd that go over?
I mean, on one hand, Ellen, obviously she was very excited that she would be able to go see another country, and the United States obviously is a place that you would like to go to and visit, if not settle down at some point, because we had absolutely no idea at that point that we are going to be finally settling down in the United States. So she was excited, but at the same time, both of us, we didn't know what to expect. I mean, it was a new country, it was a different country. So we said, let's just go there, and you know, obviously we'll be able to learn about the country and how things are. So yeah, I was mixed feelings. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of excitement, but at the same time, a lot of apprehension, a lot of questions that we had.
Family give you a hard time about that?
Not exactly. I mean, you know, they knew that whatever decisions we make will be the right decision. So, no.
Okay. Now, you were actually very active in the community after work hours. You're on a number of local boards, and recently the governor appointed you to the Commission for Asian Pacific Affairs for the state, and you get to work with Asian American leaders from all over the state of Michigan. Sure. Were you this active in volunteer work back in India?
No, I was not. So I'm very fortunate that I have actually been able to get these opportunities, especially after I moved to Grand Rapids. So I've been here 5 years now, and prior to that, I was not as actively involved, even though I've been here almost 2 decades. But it's only in the past 5 years that I would say that I've become so actively involved. So, and I really enjoy doing what I'm doing right now. I think I'm at a stage of my career where I definitely want to give back to the community. So everything that I'm doing, I'm getting a lot of satisfaction out of what I'm able to actually give back.
Sure. And I know that this community per capita does a very high level of volunteering and community work. But across the U.S., that's the general part of our culture. Do you think it's less so in India?
It used to be like that earlier. Now, obviously, India is also getting influenced, and it's not uncommon these days for you to find, if you go to India, to find that people are actually volunteering. And there's a lot of awareness about how they can all play a role, they can all contribute to the society, the community. So people have become more aware, and with that awareness, they're coming out more in the open, and they're actually spending a lot of time helping other people.
Sure.
So it's changing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. One of your community activities is with your Bengali culture group.
That is correct.
Can you tell us what you do?
Sure. So it's called West Michigan Bengali Cultural Association, and it's actually a group that was created roughly about 12 years ago, but we became a nonprofit organization only about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's a very small group, but we are very proud of the fact that we actually have been able to contribute a lot to the community, as well as also do a lot of great stuff to ensure that the people that we bring in from those communities, the Bengali communities and other people from India, we're able to integrate them. So how we do that is we actually organize a lot of cultural events throughout the year. And what we strongly believe in is that when people come in to any new place, they're always looking for other people for support. And especially families. I mean, you know, we end up spending a lot of time at work, and most of the time we're busy doing our day-to-day job, but it's the family that no one thinks about. It's the family, the spouse or the kids who spend a considerable amount of time at home, and if you do not provide them as a community, if you do not provide them with resources or ways through which they can give expression to their cultural heritage, they start actually putting a lot of pressure on the employee or the person. So this association, what we think we do very well is we organize such events. We are able to get our community members involved in a big way, and through that process they are able to find an outlet, and they therefore they find this place to be very welcoming. And at the end of the day, from an organization and employer point of view, these people can be retained very well.
Mm-hmm. And that transitions into the next area I wanted to talk about. In your job at Amway, you work in talent acquisition. Mm-hmm. How do you get smart people to come to the area? But can you talk about this yin and yang with recruitment and retention?
Sure. So even before I do that, I think the way I like to look at it, so we are in Michigan right now, right? And when I look at what are some of the things that a state likes to do, I mean, I'm going to talk about the employer, but even as a state, Michigan, like any other state, I'm sure, is interested in doing two things. One, it is basically trying to get a lot of investment from outside, because it's important for that state to be able to create new jobs. Mm. And as they do that, they obviously go out, and when they're looking for investment, they're going out of the country, they're going to other countries, China and other places, looking for investment. They're also looking for ways through which they are able to sell their products and services to some of those audiences. Now, those could be other communities within the United States that belong to some of those other groups, or it could be a larger global market that they're trying to sell to. So as a state tries to do that, and all the employers within that state, they want to do the same thing in this era of globalization today, talent obviously becomes a huge factor, because if you don't have the right people to do that, then it obviously you don't have the ability to be able to produce things that you are going to sell. So now, talking from an employer point of view and putting that talent acquisition hat on, I think the organizations then look at this function, talent acquisition, to be able to attract talent first. And then also they're looking for ways through which they can retain those talents. Now, one of the things I always say is attracting talent from outside is easier than retaining talent. Because yes, I mean, even attraction or hiring takes time, and you require certain skills to be able to convince people as to why they should be coming to this beautiful place where the weather may or may not be what they're looking for. But at the same time, it is not as difficult as finally being able to retain them. Because once an employee is hired and they come into this community, at the end of the day, whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to move out will depend on what is the environment, one, in the organization that the employee has joined, but also, like I had said before, it is also about what kind of community it is and how welcoming that community is. So as talent acquisition professionals, what we'd like to do is to, one, make sure that the organization, our organization, and in this case, Amway, we provide or we create that environment, we create all the infrastructure and the support system within the organization so that these employees that we are hiring become comfortable. Then, on top of that, we also work with community organizations to make sure that those community organizations are also then able to work with these employees and their families to make them comfortable.
So are there specific mechanisms in place within the company, and how does that work? Because there are lots of cracks that things can fall through. How do you make sure, how do you guide someone? Because I'm thinking about this as the metaphor, the analogy rather, is recruiting and retention is a little bit like dating and then marriage. Like, okay, after you've signed the contract, how do you stay in the marriage? Because, if there's profound unhappiness, this divorce is going to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely correct. So from our perspective, I mean, some of the things that we do, one, we usually start, this actually starts at a pre-hiring stage itself. So even before we've hired someone, as we are dating or courting that individual, what we like to do is to understand what are some of the questions and concerns that the person might have, and more importantly, what the family might have. So as a part of that whole recruiting or the screening process, our recruiters are asking those questions to really understand what are their hot buttons, what are their triggers, what are the questions or the doubts that they have in mind.
So it goes to being proactive.
Extremely proactive. And with that information, what we typically do is we look for similar people with similar background within our company, and then we create an opportunity for the two to talk to each other so that questions can be answered even before the candidate likes to move forward in that process. So that's what we do at that stage. And once we've done that successfully, and once we have answered all the questions and the person joins the organization, as a part of the onboarding, we have the system that we call the buddy system. So as someone is coming in, as a part of the orientation, as a part of the overall onboarding, we assign people as buddies to these individuals who, over a period of 90 days or over 120 days, they work together with these people, try and make sure that they're absolutely comfortable with the environment. If they need any support within the organization, that's provided to them. And then from that point onwards, we also help them through what we call the affinity networks or inclusion networks that we have created. So right now at Amway, we have multiple such networks. And all those networks, you can become, as an employee, you can become a member of. And by becoming a member, you are able to not only get answers to a lot of questions that you might have.
So, for example, there would be an Asian association, an Asian network, a Latino network, for example?
What we have done is we actually didn't want to get into all of those. So what we created what we call a multi-generation network.
Okay.
And then we created a women's network.
Okay.
We've also created what we call an early in career network.
Interesting.
And then we have another network which is a multicultural network.
Okay.
So that way, depending upon what your interests are, you could become a member of any of these
And
networks.
if you're an immigrant or an expat, you can lean on other immigrants and expats because you're in the same or a similar boat.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, I mean, it certainly benefits the individual employee, but the other side of this is it actually also benefits the organization, because the organization is learning a lot of nuances, cultural nuances through some of these groups that they can then apply to their business model. And because they're selling to different audiences
all over the world,
and this is very important information for them. So it actually is a win-win both for the organization as well as for the employee. So
sure.
These are some of the things that we do, and in addition to that, we also train our managers and leaders and other people on how to avoid unconscious bias. Sure. I mean, that's something that's very,
we all
very
grow up
important.
with. Right. We're going to have to wrap up in just a moment, but for recruiters, HR managers, leaders in companies, they're looking to recruit and then keep talent. What's the summary on your best advice?
My best advice would be curious. Always be asking questions, because we work in a global environment. It is extremely important for us to know about other people. Unless we know about other people, we'll not be able to leverage their talent. We'll not be able to attract, we'll not be able to retain them. So that, in a nutshell, I think is very important. Always be curious.
Awesome. That's super advice. I want to thank you so much for coming by and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alan, for inviting me.
You're welcome.
The Canadian and U.S. relationship is one of the closest in the world internationally, and we have many cousins and brothers and husbands and wives, children and in-laws and so forth, who have blended in families internationally.